Hello, my name's Anne Kruger. I'm the Director for Asia Pacific at First Draft. This presentation gives an overview of the information ecosystem from a misinformation lens. It covers key concepts and the tools and techniques employed by agents of disinformation. First, let's start with the typical thing that we've come to expect, given what we know about the digital information ecosystem and information disorder. We're not surprised when we see things like this. Last year, the Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk had her flu shot taken in front of the media. But she reenacted this for the TV crew so that they could get their special photos and shots. Of course, this was enough for people to make allegations that it was a faked flu shot and open the pathway to conspiracy theories. So shortly after the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison was vaccinated, we saw lots of different baseless claims too that he faked his vaccination, the coronavirus vaccination that was. And this was circulating on social media and really sort of opens the door to a whole lot of conspiracy theories. So why would these rumours need to circulate? It picks up on an agenda by authorities that the conspiracy theories peddle, that he's pretending because he expects people to get the jab, but not himself. These conspiracy theories about vaccines are really used in a way to say that governments and authorities are trying to control populations. So as I mentioned, we're not really surprised when we see these things. So where are we now? Well, very much that we're focused on monitoring the web. We see misleading narratives to conspiracy theories, and we really see this complexity and scale of information pollution in today's digital and divided world. And this really presents an unprecedented challenge to people as far as media literacy is concerned, ordinary citizens, as well as the journalists who are charged with making sense of all of this. So at First Draft, we really work to try to empower people with the knowledge that they need and understanding and the tools to help them build this resilience against harmful, false and misleading information. I've worked throughout Asia for most of my career, and on the right is a photo of me when I was at CNN in Hong Kong and working throughout SARS and reporting on SARS. And we had a lot of misinformation then on mobile phones, but we didn't have the smartphones then, but we still had text messages coming through at the time, with homemade remedies and cures, people trying to help each other. And then on the left was when I was in Hong Kong in 2014 during the start of the protests. And we saw a lot of misinformation in the forms of images and photos that were just taken out of context. So it was a real photo, but it might have been from, sometimes way back at 1997. And these were used to cause a lot of harm as far as, frightening people and, a lot of what we call information pollution that way. So today on our agenda, we're going to be looking at understanding misinformation and disinformation, the tools and techniques of agents of disinformation, and I'll go through the 7 types of mis and disinformation as we explain them with First Draft from our research really, and how we work on these definitions. So really we start with misinformation and we think about the motivations. So here people are, I guess, more making a mistake with misinformation. It's not their intention to design something to deceive, okay? If anything, it's their intention, sometimes we've seen, to try to help people, so they're sharing the information, or they might just mistakenly share something and believe it was true, didn't understand it was actually satire, for instance. But when it comes to disinformation, this is much more of a concerted effort. So it's a different motivation there. It's a motivation to do harm or to try to gain political control, to try to gain financial control, or to try to disparage people. So what are the tools that people use? Or agents of disinformation use? We have a lot of rumours that circulate through groups and online spaces. A lot of it spreading through closed messaging apps. These are increasingly popular. Visuals and memes are compelling vehicles for disinformation because we tend to remember something that we see a lot more. It sticks a lot more. Effective misinformation often involves a kernel of truth to it. So there might be a fact, but it's completely taken out of context or reworked. And of course, we've seen a lot of scammers who are really trying to capitalize on misinformation and disinformation and, really just try to sell things. An example of this, where we look at it going through closed chat apps, was this bit of information that was being shared on WhatsApp, and it was saying fairly early on in the pandemic last year that Professor Honjo, who is a professor of medicine, a Nobel Award-winning laureate, was saying that the coronavirus was man-made in a lab. Okay, so completely unproven, and it had a fabricated screenshot that was shared in the closed messaging spaces. It went throughout Australia and India. Now, I noticed that because we look at Google Trends and we use that to see what are people searching, and I noticed that Professor Honjo's name was trending in Australia, and I'm thinking, why? He hasn't been in the news, he hasn't made any announcements. I hadn't received the WhatsApp notification personally, but I was given a tip off to people from some of the diverse media circles that we have in our networks at First Draft, and we all work together, that this was circulating in WhatsApp groups and in Facebook Messenger groups as well. So we were able to warn other journalists, do debunks, and got some fact checks done in Australia and in India, and also warn our colleagues throughout our other bureaus in the US and in the UK. And it came to a point where Lord Alan Sugar, who's the host of The Apprentice in the UK, also got this message and he retweeted it. So fact checkers and journalists were really quick to pounce and say, no, this is a fabrication. This is people trying to stir up trouble. This is disinformation. Don't believe it. Some of the if we have a look into some of the toolbox, if you like, of agents of disinformation in particular, we really see issues where things like keyword squatting is used. Now, this is something that was coined by the researcher Joan Donovan and also Brian Friedman from Harvard. And this is the strategic domination of keywords to misrepresent groups, individuals, or information. It's not surprising that we saw people were buying up domain names during coronavirus, and people will co-opt a hashtag. They might get a quality hashtag, as we saw during the bushfires. We saw, bushfire or climate emergency, and that was co-opted with the arson emergency. That was complete misinformation and disinformation, trying to push a climate deniers agenda that way. So that's what we mean when we see things like keyword squatting in that list. Also brigading, that's when people will encourage others to pounce on a Facebook site or Instagram site and put a lot of negative comments on that to try to spread their cause, their agenda, and also it's really like a DDoS attack. So it is just overwhelm the system as well. And we see a lot of imposter content coming through. And so basically you've just got these bad actors that are really wanting their content to move across different parts of social media and the web. Okay, so just a quick word when it comes to our definitions. We don't use the term fake news, and that's basically because the term's really been weaponized for those that disagree with perhaps a news story or those that have another agenda, and it really it doesn't take in the complexity of what we're dealing with. And I'll go through the different examples now, and you'll see why that term fake news it just doesn't cut it. It just can actually do more harm than good. So we've divided it into satire and parody. This is not to say that that's a bad thing, because we do need satire and parody to reflect on life. But as I mentioned with misinformation, people might pick up on it and think that it's real. They might not realize that this article from The Onion or the Batuta Advocate is actually written as satire. And you really have to know the news first to be able to appreciate sometimes that satire and the nuances that they're referring to. Misleading content, I'll show you some examples of that, and where misleading a misleading use of information is really used to frame an individual or an issue, and we'll go through and I'll show you some various different examples of where we get on this spectrum and right through to just completely false context and manipulations. So an example of satire or parody. Here's one where Pope Francis, purportedly made this announcement that COVID-19 vaccine is mandatory for entering heaven. And this came from a satirical website. Okay, so you and I know that that's obviously, a satire and quite unlikely. But if people aren't used to, looking at the website that was sharing that information and actually looking in to see, more about that page, and haven't read that it's satirical, they might not have got that information. It gets tricky too when you've got issues like this one, US vows to invade next country that asks for COVID vaccine IP. So this is a highly contentious and also complex political issue to do with trades, to do with trademarks, to do with protecting, obviously the US didn't want their IP to get in the hands of, perhaps China or Russia, who could perhaps make money out of the new technology. And this one actually looks probably a little bit more believable, if you like, than the previous example. But you can see what's at stake here with the level of seriousness, if you like, of the information. So false connection, we're really looking at where people are trying to say this plus this equals that. A lot of examples here, purportedly saying that, well, okay, alcohol-based hand sanitizer contains 60% alcohol, may kill coronavirus. So, then drinking alcohol, will help to stop you getting infected. So they're making these connections, but it doesn't, as we know. It can actually make you quite sick. So this was actually a headline, or a title that just doesn't match the body of the text of the story as well. And we see this a lot in YouTube videos. Things will be in all caps saying, watch this before it gets taken down. So it's really trying to grab people's attention with this false connection. But then often it doesn't, deliver, with quality information, and can actually be quite dangerous for people. Another example of false connection, we see a lot of posts and memes on Instagram that were attempting to link the dates of election dates with virus outbreaks throughout the world and throughout history, including Zika and coronavirus. But actually, if you look at some of those dates, things like the Zika virus was actually first discovered back in 1947, and the first notable outbreak was on the Pacific island of Yap in Micronesia in 2007. So they haven't even really got their dates correct there. Misleading context. So this one's a little bit different, where the information you're looking at seems to point to one thing, but if you stop and dig into it a little bit more, it actually means something completely different. So there's an example here that we found in December last year from Reddit, and it raised concerns about the Pfizer trials that were happening in the US, saying, 4 volunteers developed facial paralysis, and it got quite a lot of upvotes on Reddit. Now, this cited a report by Russia Today on the same day, and the same claim was also shared by a Sydney-based conspiracy theorist who says that she's actually a registered nurse. But she's actually a conspiracy theorist and anti-vaccination activist as well. So things are not always what they seem, and this claim is misleading because the facial paralysis was temporary, and the 4 cases in the vaccine group don't represent a frequency above that would be expected in the general population, according to the FDA. False context. So this is one of the most problematic types of content that we see. And the way it works is that a photograph or a video or a report or even a PDF that was true and accurate at the time when it was taken or published gets reshared in a misleading context. Sometimes it's months, even years later. It could be in a different country with different subtitles added to it, possibly even different languages we see. Often it's shared to fit a new narrative or a new agenda that someone wants to push. And in this case, it was an example where they wanted to do racist harm. And when we have that, we call this weaponized context. So here we had a video of a woman eating bat soup that was claimed to show a Chinese influencer who started the pandemic. However, the woman actually said the video was taken in 2016 when she was visiting Palau. This is something else that we see. Just, it was a photo that was shared during the Black Lives Matters protests over the summer of the US summer, saying, look at the chaos, that type of thing, trying to sort of spread unease. But it's actually taken from 2016 in Philadelphia. Our US colleagues pointed that one out to us. A bit closer to home, during the previous elections in 2019, immigration scare campaigns against Muslims in Australia were waged by far-right groups during the election campaign. So we saw groups that were, spreading memes like this saying, Muslim Australians using their burqas to hide their identity and vote multiple times, really trying to undermine the community. But if you just do a simple reverse image search, that image was actually taken out of context and was used in the Saudi Arabia election in 2015, showing women being able to vote. So completely different context there. Imposter content, as its name suggests, this is really where you have someone that is trying to take over an identity that already exists, and they really use the label or that branding as a highway to authenticity. So someone will recognize a newsroom's logo, and you're already gaining trust by people because they think, oh, that's something like that that I know, something that I trust. And we also saw it throughout the pandemic in Australia with government media releases, because you get to use the logos and the emblems, and UNICEF were also targeted, and they said that they never actually circulated this memo. Okay, so it can be quite damaging and quite misleading. So as I mentioned earlier about the Muslim scare campaigns, we had imposter content that was targeting politicians as well, trying to tell people who to vote for, and in particular sort of waged this war, I guess, against candidates who seem to be more immigration friendly and try to deride them. In this example, we see the then opposition leader Bill Shorten. So he was seen as being more friendly towards immigration perhaps, so he was targeted. But in this one, everything from the Twitter verification tick to the Twitter interface is completely fabricated. On this one, it's an imposter post. The Twitter handle isn't actually his. We looked at that Twitter handle that was there at Bill Shorten, and it was actually suspended at the time. And we never actually saw this being sent on Twitter. It was just a copy-paste job that was circulating through Facebook, uploaded through Facebook. So a manipulated image there. It also circulated on WeChat. And if you actually have a look at the real Bill Shorten handle, it has MP on the end. You probably can't see on the screen, but it has MP there, and he follows a lot of journalists, so that's not unusual to see that. So that leads us really to manipulated content, and this is where we see people that are superimposing or editing, putting up subtitles, or editing a photo or a picture. With this particular example, we saw that a subtitle was added to a video saying that this is the marketplace where coronavirus started. But actually it came from a video of a market in Indonesia, and it was posted online in June 2019. so it's really just trying to stir up trouble. So we call this manipulated content. Some people will say things like, oh, you mean a Photoshop? Well, yes, but that's actually a product owned by Adobe. So we try to actually say that it's a manipulated image, or could be video, because it's not only Adobe brands that can be used as well. So a bit more on the fabricated content. So here we've got an example of a meme, and memes circulate through the internet very quickly, very popular with Australians in social media. And this one circulated quite quickly throughout the Pacific as well. It was a fabricated claim that the COVID-19 nasal swab damages the blood-brain barrier. And they just know how to create these memes that, you know, kind of could look believable and can do harm. And, you know, we also see fabricated content. This is just a completely made up story from New Zealand saying that Bill Gates had arrived in New Zealand and he was there to do harm with vaccines and creating virtual IDs for people and track people. And the authorities in New Zealand actually said, well, no, we've got no record of him turning up on our lands. And of course, it's in the height of the lockdown, so it was highly unlikely. Despite this Facebook post that was shared hundreds of times. So as I mentioned, memes are really popular, a popular way of sharing misinformation and disinformation and just an agenda. And they're just so fast, and they carry so much information in that image. So that's something that we look out for. So, you know, that's a good wrap of the 7 types of problematic content that we look out for. And it pretty much applies to everything. And, you know, you can have mixtures of these examples as well. So we've really had this shift in the last couple of years with how we approach our work. We're not just doing individual fact checks, but we're looking at the whole evolution and movement of misleading and misrepresentation of narratives across the internet. So I think it's good for people to be taught how to do the debunks and how to do the verification. And we've got plenty of resources on our First Draft website to do that. But also to think in terms of, okay, this isn't just happening in a vacuum. Where else has this been spreading on social media, and who's pushing a message and who's trying to take advantage? So thank you very much for your time. I hope that was helpful. Please do reach out to us, training@firstdraftnews.com, if we can help in any way in future. Thank you.